On the 15th of January 2022, a small island in the South Pacific stopped existing. There was almost no warning the rest of the world would feel. A flat, blue horizon. A thin ribbon of steam, a speck of land about 40 miles from the nearest town. Then the sea detonated. In half an hour, a column of ash and steam climbed higher than any eruption ever recorded. It punched through the clouds, through the jet stream, and kept climbing toward the edge of space. A wave of pressure raced out across the ocean and did not stop. It swept past Fiji, past New Zealand, past Hawaii, all the way to Alaska, more than 6,000 miles away, where people heard the booms roll across a clear morning sky and had no idea what they were listening to. That wave circled the entire planet, not once, 7 times. It was the loudest sound the Earth had made in 140 years. It hurled enough water into the sky to change the atmosphere itself, and it reached out 6,800 miles to drown 2 people on a beach in Peru who never felt the ground move. Almost none of it happened on land. The most powerful eruption of this century came from underwater, from a volcano most people had never heard of, in a part of the world we still barely understand. This is the story of Hunga Tonga, and of the few hours when the ocean reminded us exactly how small we are. Start with the thing itself, because almost none of it is visible. What we call Hunga Tonga is really the top of an enormous underwater mountain, a volcano rising more than a mile from the floor of the South Pacific. For most of its life, it is completely hidden. Only the very rim of its crater ever broke the surface, in the form of 2 small, uninhabited islets, sitting quietly in the blue about 40 miles north of Tonga's main island. For a long time, that was all anyone saw. 2 rocky scraps of land, home to a few seabirds, easy to sail past without a second glance. Then, between 2014 and 2015, the volcano stirred and built something new. An eruption piled up enough ash and rock to join the 2 islets together into a single island, a fresh piece of land where there had been open water. Scientists were fascinated. A brand new island is rare, and they studied this one closely as it settled and greened over, treating it as a natural laboratory. It was interesting. It did not feel dangerous. What almost no one appreciated was the trap sitting underneath it. Here is the cruel piece of physics at the center of this whole story. A volcano that erupts on dry land is violent but predictable. A volcano that erupts under very deep water is often smothered because the sheer weight of the ocean above presses the explosion back down. But a volcano that sits in shallow water with its vent only a few hundred feet below the surface is the most dangerous of all. There is enough seawater to feed the reaction, and not enough to contain it. Hunga Tonga sat in exactly that narrow, dangerous middle. Its vent lay only around 500 feet down, too deep, and the ocean would have muffled it on dry land, and there would have been no seawater to turn the eruption into a bomb. Instead, it was poised at the one depth that turns magma and seawater into something far worse than either. In December of 2021, the volcano began to clear its throat. It coughed up steam and ash for days, building the kind of small spitting eruptions that scientists had seen from it before. Then, in early January, it went quiet. That quiet was not the end of anything. It was the volcano taking a breath. At 14 minutes past 5 in the evening, local time on January 15th, the mountain let go. Magma surged up the throat of the volcano, and somewhere around 500 feet beneath the waves, it met the ocean. Rock hotter than 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit touched cold seawater, and the water did not simply boil. It flashed to steam in an instant, expanding hundreds of times over, blasting the sea out of the way. That opened the door for more seawater to rush in and touch more magma, which flashed again and again. Each pulse fed the next. It is a runaway reaction, and once it truly begins, it feeds itself. The result was not a lava flow, it was an explosion. NASA scientists estimated the blast released energy on the order of 10 megatons of TNT, and some estimates ran higher still. For a sense of scale, the bomb that leveled Hiroshima was 15 kilotons. This was hundreds of times more powerful, unleashed in a matter of seconds from beneath the sea. Above the water, the sky came apart. In roughly 30 minutes, the plume climbed to about 35 miles high. It tore through the stratosphere and pushed into the mesosphere, the third layer of our atmosphere, a region so high that no aircraft and no weather ever reaches it. No volcanic plume had ever been recorded reaching so far. It stood nearly 10 miles taller than the cloud from Mount Pinatubo in 1991, which had held the record until that afternoon. And for the first time in history, a blast of this size was captured live from space. Weather satellites parked over the Pacific recorded the whole thing, frame by frame, and scientists around the world watched it happen in near real time. From up there, it looked almost serene, a vast, white umbrella of cloud hundreds of miles across, blooming outward over the ocean in total silence, hiding the violence underneath. What the satellites could not convey was that the eruption kept going on and off for around 12 hours. When the ash finally thinned, the island was gone. Most of the land that had stood for 7 years had simply been erased, replaced by a new crater, almost 2.5 miles wide, its floor sitting nearly half a mile below the surface of the sea. The first thing that told the world how big this was the sound. More than 6,000 miles away in Alaska, people stepped outside to a series of deep booms rolling across a clear sky with no storm and no source in sight. Residents called the police. The eruption was heard across the Pacific from Fiji to New Zealand to the coast of North America. It was, by the measurements that followed, the loudest sound the planet had produced since the eruption of Krakatoa in 1883. But the sound was only the part we could hear. The eruption also sent out a wall of atmospheric pressure, an invisible pulse moving through the air itself. Weather stations all over the world caught it as a sudden jump on their barometers, a clean spike passing through England, through the United States, through Asia, hours and hours after the blast. Ordinary people noticed it too. Weather hobbyists watched. The pressure gauges in their own homes twitch at the exact moment the wave rolled through their town, then posted the readings online, and together they helped trace the pulse as it swept around the globe 4 times in one direction and 3 times in the other before it finally faded. 7 laps around the Earth. The last time a volcano had wrung the whole atmosphere like that was Krakatoa, and no instrument alive in 2022 had ever recorded anything like it. And then there was the lightning. An eruption this violent generates its own storm. Ash particles grind against each other and against ice high in the plume, building enormous electrical charges, and the sky answers with lightning on a scale that is hard to picture. Over 3 days, instruments counted nearly 600,000 flashes around the volcano. On the day of the main eruption alone, about 400,000. At the peak, more than 25,000 flashes in a single 5-minute stretch. For a while that evening, roughly half of all the lightning happening on the entire planet was crackling around this one column of ash rising out of the ocean. While the sky convulsed, the sea was already moving. An explosion that size, shoving that much water aside, does not stay quiet. It sends out a tsunami. In Tonga, the waves came ashore as high as 66 feet. On the uninhabited island of Tofua, the water ran up the land to nearly 150 feet. And close to the volcano itself, scientists later estimated the very first wave may have towered close to 300 feet before it began racing outward. But this tsunami did something a tsunami is not supposed to do. It appeared in oceans it had no business reaching. Tide gauges picked up strange waves in the Caribbean, in the Mediterranean, on the far side of the world, in seas that a normal Pacific tsunami could never touch. This was a genuine surprise to the scientists watching. The pressure wave in the air was pushing the water ahead of it, spawning waves thousands of miles from the source. The atmosphere and the ocean were working together, and the rule book for how tsunamis behave suddenly had a new chapter. The cost was real. In Tonga, the waves killed at least 4 people and swept whole villages off the lowest lying islands. And then, 6,800 miles away, on the coast of Peru, the sea suddenly rose on a calm summer day and drowned 2 more. Those same waves shoved a tanker that was unloading crude oil at a refinery near Lima, spilling around 6,000 barrels into the water. It became the worst environmental disaster in Peru's recorded history, an oil slick smearing miles of coastline, set off by a volcano nearly 7,000 miles away. Back in Tonga, the country went dark in every sense. Down on the seafloor, the eruption had done something no one had ever measured before. It sent avalanches of rock and ash racing along the bottom of the ocean at nearly 80 miles an hour, the fastest underwater flows ever recorded, traveling more than 60 miles from the volcano and scouring everything in their path. One of the things in their path was the single undersea cable that connected the islands to the internet, more than 500 miles of fiber cut, with an 80-mile stretch of it shredded on the seabed. Above the surface, ash nearly an inch deep smothered the capital and fouled the drinking water. And with the phones and the internet gone, the outside world was left almost blind. For days after the largest eruption in a generation, no one beyond Tonga's shores really knew how bad it was. The first reconnaissance flights had to wait for the ash to clear just to photograph the damage. Tonga would stay cut off for 5 weeks, and by the government's own count, the disaster reached 85% of the country's population. The eruption threw one more thing into the sky, something no camera could show because it was invisible: water. Because this explosion happened underwater, it launched an astonishing amount of seawater straight up into the atmosphere as vapor, enough to fill roughly 58,000 Olympic swimming pools. It raised the total amount of water in the stratosphere by about 10% in a single afternoon. Nothing in the era of modern satellites had ever done that, and that matters more than it sounds. Water vapor traps heat. Most large volcanoes actually cool the planet for a year or two because they fill the sky with ash and sulfur that reflect sunlight away. This one may have done the reverse. By flooding the upper atmosphere with water, Hunga Tonga may have nudged the Earth's surface temperature slightly upward, and scientists believe that faint effect could linger for years. Satellites are still tracking that water today, a slowly thinning haze left behind by a single afternoon. That is the thing that stays with me about Hunga Tonga. It was not a distant, abstract event. In one afternoon, a mountain almost no one thought about reached out from under the ocean and touched the entire planet. It deafened Alaska. It rang the whole atmosphere like a bell 7 times over. It killed people who were standing on beaches an ocean away. And it left a fingerprint in the sky that we are still measuring today. And here is the part that should keep you up at night. We saw this one coming only in the loosest sense, and we still could not have imagined the scale. We map the floor of the ocean in less detail than we map the surface of Mars. Volcanoes like this one, hidden under the water, are almost impossible to watch closely and even harder to predict. There are thousands more of them down there in the dark, most of them unmonitored, most of them unnamed, any one of them capable of the same thing. Hunga Tonga was simply the one that woke up while we were watching. The ocean, as always, was keeping its secrets. For a few hours, it decided to show us just one. If you want to keep going deeper, this channel is where we do it. Subscribe, and we will see you on the next descent.